Let's discuss the crisis in Sri Lanka and other pressing issues with Global Affairs Analyst Sam Phatey, who is joining me from Washington, D.C. via Skype. Good to have you join us.
Can you hear me?
All right, yes, I can. It does look like the protesters will be getting one of the demands, which is, or the major demand, by the way, which is the resignation of the Prime Minister and the President. But Rajapaksa has said he would resign on Wednesday. But is that the beginning of change for Sri Lanka?
Not entirely. We have seen similar processes occur and in different places every time. But does that mean that the economic situation in Sri Lanka is going to change? No. I mean, again, first of all, let's look at Sri Lanka's debt. Their international debt is unserviceable. So that alone is a struggle by itself. IMF can help. IMF has helped other countries like Argentina. But that help is not enough to reverse the international debt crisis that Sri Lanka is currently facing. Now, of course, this crisis is more or less exaggerated by the current global economic crisis. I mean, inflation is ridiculously high than we have ever seen, even after World War II. But here's the thing. It's one thing to try to address and manage the economic crisis, such as inflation, etc. And when many people do not understand how macroeconomics work, I mean, governments must prioritize what to give them. So you may be subsidizing of food prices, subsidizing imported foods, and trying to make them cheaper, and maybe trying to make sure that they get their medication and some basic essential needs while trying to mitigate inflationary problems that they are having with their currency and while trying to manage or probably renegotiate and reservice their debt. So I think the government failed in doing that. And so when food prices go high, when people get hungry, it's enough reasons for them to go out. And but the question that is left unanswered is that when there's a new government, will they be able to manage that?
Hmm. And I want to get to the economics of this, but I want to stay on the politics first. What do you think that politics in Sri Lanka would look like without the Rajapaksa family?
Well, you know what? I think it's been a long time coming, and it will not look any different. I mean, it's probably politics also the way politics is played has to do a lot with the cultural mindset of the people. Now, are the people willing to give somebody else a chance, and then they're going to create that dynasty? But one thing is clear: majority of Sri Lanka seem to support the Rajapaksa family going away. And but that does not mean that generations of the Rajapaksa family are not going to come and then take part in the politics of Sri Lanka. We are seeing it happen actually in the Philippines right now. So it can happen anywhere else. So there's nothing that is going to stop that from happening. But what it does is it's going to give it's going to give an opportunity for some new faces to come into the limelight, into the game of the politics in Sri Lanka. Other politics is a game of opportunity. Other people will take this opportunity and rise to the occasion. But I can guarantee you, for the most part, it's going to be the same old faces, the same old people within the same old circle that are going to take the lead.
Mm. And that basically leads me to my next question, because now there is a talk about forming an interim government. Members of parliament are looking to see if they can whip up 113 members, which will make up majority, and that's other opposition political parties are trying to see they can get a 113 member coalition to get the majority in parliament. But what is the prospect that that happens? And then that if that happens, actually, that interim government can bring stability to Sri Lanka in the meantime.
So here's the interesting thing about coalition government, right? When there's an opportunity, opposition parties are more than likely to come together, or certain parties are more than likely to come together, right? Because in this part of the world, the politics is not about one of ideology or policy. It's very self-invested, and so you can see people come together just because they want to achieve something. That's the problem with coalition. And at the end of the day, they fail. Even in mature democracies, Germany, coalitions if you go to Africa, coalitions really do not really stick together. They do not really work. They end up failing. Yeah, I mean, this is 99% of coalition. You have you have the little 1% that would vote. In the case of Sri Lanka, I can tell you that this coalition cannot going to vote. They would vote right now just because they have a common purpose and they want to achieve that. But once that purpose is achieved, what's going to happen is a lot of dispute in terms of decisions, who controls what, and that takes away the focus from addressing the economic issues, the real problem that gave rise to the Rajapaksa family being ousted from power. And again, we're talking about people power. But once the coalition comes together and goes into office, then it's going to be another power struggle. It's a new phase of power struggle that takes away from the critical job of trying to reform the economy, maybe introducing some fiscal policies as part of their. I mean, they have to adopt a contractional monetary policy in the first place, which is very important. So all the power struggle is going to distract them from having those very important macroeconomic policies in place.
Almost like what we now see in Israel, even though that's under a different circumstance. But let's also talk about you were talking about the economics of this, and I said we're going to get to that in just a moment. There has been a request for bailout from the IMF and the World Bank by Sri Lanka. But now that there is protest in that country, unrest as it would seem, and the resignation of the prime minister and the president, hopefully they say they will do that on Wednesday. Without a government and with the unrest, what's the likelihood of bailout by IMF and the World Bank?
Again, there's not a total collapse of government, right? If you go into government itself and look at the structures of government, you have the political appointees, right? And of course, for most countries, like Sri Lanka, even the technocrats end up being political appointees. You get appointed because of your political affiliation. But the fact that you have people, what we call permanent secretaries, okay? So the permanent secretaries, they are deputies and people at the ministerial levels should be able to continue negotiating with the IMF. I mean, they should be able to continue the work that is already there. I mean, the political class collapsing doesn't mean it is the collapse of government. Yes, government, there's a power vacuum and government doesn't have leadership. But the different ministries must take leadership, especially the Ministry of Finance, and must take the leadership to continue the negotiation. So the minister is still there. It's not like the minister is not there. But the minister is not the most important part in terms of IMF negotiations. I mean, they have their permanent secretary. They have their directors of the budget. These are the people that are important in doing that. They have their central bank. I mean, they have their senior economists and macroeconomic policymakers and the central bank. These are the people that need to take part in doing that. So they still have a window of chance. But IMF may withhold any support that they may approve or that they may feel they need to approve until there is proper leadership, and then they will be, because it needs to be executed, right? So, and then they do IMF does a monitoring program when they give you a bailout, and that requires you to have the leadership. So for now, instead of stalling the process or stopping the process, they can continue. But those funds will not be disbursed to Sri Lanka until they get a president and a prime minister and a political leadership, well-structured political leadership.
And I also want you to speak to the humanitarian crisis angle of this, because that is also, that cannot be, and you can't separate that from exactly what's going on. The country is now bankrupt. There are food shortages, and even if you have food, there is cooking gas shortage, there is fuel shortage. So speak to the humanitarian crisis, the angle of the humanitarian crisis of the Sri Lanka crisis in general.
I mean, this is where it tells the importance of government having to ensure that there is fiscal discipline. The lack of fiscal discipline, for the most part, and is what has led Sri Lanka to this position that they are in. When the political class do not make decisions at the best interest of the general population, but at the interest of the very few at the top. Now, Sri Lanka is in a situation where, even with the IMF bailout, it may not stop the rise in inflation in the country. So things will keep getting more and more and more expensive. So this is a third world country, very poor in Southeast Asia, and they have been relying a lot on the South Asia specific free trade area in terms of exporting some of their goods duty free to places like India. Now, when there is instability, a lot of the people will not be able to do that, and a lot of the people, let's say in the palm oil business or in other businesses that they are exporting duty free, are some of the poorest people. Now, if they cannot afford food, if they cannot afford medical care, this can regress the progress that the little progress that the country has made by more than 5 years to a decade. So now a larger chunk of the population is going to be in poverty. So now we have pretty much to work development as people would focus on trying to see what they can feed their family. It's unfortunate, but I think the SAFTA countries or the SAFTA nations, which is the free economic trade zone in that area, must come together. I think it's important for them to have a urgent summit where they can provide some aid. Not everybody have to wait for the UN to do that, but I think the SAFTA countries can provide some kind of aid to Sri Lanka.
Well, we await the announcement of the resignation of the president and the prime minister on Wednesday, and we'll see how the country takes things from there. Thank you so much for talking to us, Global Affairs Analyst Sam Phatey.
My pleasure.